Hey, thanks so much for finding the video. Do us a favor. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe. And be sure to leave your comment. We love to interact. Enjoy the video. Last week, we learned that Nick Easton wasn't going to be back with New Orleans. Nick Easton was a very valuable rotational offensive lineman for the Saints. When Max Unger retired, they signed Easton, who had been with the Vikings. They brought him in to compete for the starting center job. Eric McCoy, of course, won that job, and Easton became a rotational player. He looked awful in his first preseason back in 2019. But as the season went along, he became a very viable player. As Larry Warford didn't play well, when Andrews Pete got hurt, when Armstead got hurt and Pete kicked the left tackle, Easton became a really valuable piece. And then this year as well, with Cesar Ruiz not playing particularly well, Easton became a very good right guard, had the concussion issues. The Saints cut him. $6 million savings against the cap. We're going to see a lot of that. So that's one very valuable backup, and another is now gone as well, as Cameron Tom has signed a reserve future deal with the Miami Dolphins. Quick refresher, Cameron Tom was an undrafted free agent out of the Southern Miss in 2017. Saints signed him to their practice squad. At one point, Cameron Tom was the highest paid practice squad player in the NFL. And then the Saints signed him to their active roster because they didn't want to lose him. That's how much they thought of him. And of course, when Max Unger retired, Cam Tom was battling for the starting center job to replace Max Unger. Remember, the Saints drafted Eric McCoy, but McCoy was thought more to be a guard. So you had Cameron Tom, you had Will Clapp, you had Eric McCoy, and the aforementioned Nick Easton. And I don't know if Cameron Tom would have won the starting job, but he was going to win a spot on the active roster, and it looked like in that training camp, Will Clapp was actually going to be the odd man out. And then Cameron Tom hurt his shoulder. Will Clapp, of course, made the roster, and Will has cemented his roster spot. He's played really well for this team as the tackle eligible, as a rotational interior lineman. Will has solidified his roster spot, and now Cam Thomas is on the outs and headed to Miami, where they, of course, with Pouncey, the Pounceys announcing their retirement, Miami's looking for a center, and that may well be Cameron Tom. A couple of thoughts here. Number one, Cali! You know I had to. Cameron Tom, of course, was a Catholic High, is a Catholic High alum. Went to Southern Miss and then really came into his own at the college ranks and then has had this opportunity. On one hand, I'm very bummed for Cameron Tom in New Orleans. He had a legitimate shot to win the starting center job in New Orleans. I'm not saying that he was the odds-on favorite, but he had a legitimate shot to go compete for and win that job. And he suffered the shoulder injury that cost him his season, and he never got back. Cost him his shot. There's also sort of a butterfly effect conversation associated with Cameron Tom. Think of it this way. Let's say hypothetically that Cameron Tom in 2019 wins the starting center job. Hypothetically, okay? The Saints have drafted Eric McCoy, but Cameron Tom, they go, man, we like him. Third year in the league, been on the practice squad, this is his shot, and he wins the job. Let's say hypothetically. You can start Eric McCoy at right guard. Larry Warford doesn't make it the 2019 season. And then you don't draft Cesar Ruiz last year. Maybe you draft Patrick Queen. Maybe you go linebacker, defense. I don't know, somewhere along the way. But there is a very obvious butterfly effect as a result of Cameron Tom's injury, because had he made the squad and maybe earned us, maybe, I'm not saying it's definitive that he would have, but it's possible that he would have. But it's very interesting to think what could have been had he not been injured. The other part of that is this is a really good sign for Will Clapp. As an LSU guy, and as I think many of you know, Will interned with us here at the station, who's just an all-around great dude. Brother Martin to LSU, was a great Tiger, played many different positions, played injured, and has been a great asset to New Orleans as a guy that can play center guard. He's been the tackle eligible. He's been a valuable rotational guy on the Saints roster, and he's pretty much solidified his spot. I'm pumped for Will Clapp. So that's sort of the two sides of that coin. The other part of it as well is when you think about what may happen in this year's draft, this is as fascinating a draft as I can recall in recent memory as it pertains to the Saints, because they're not rebuilding. I mean, they've got so much talent at every level of both sides of the ball that they're not in a rebuild. And I think we all readily understand that Jameis is probably going to be the guy at quarterback, and it's unlikely they land a quarterback in round one. They probably at some point in this draft are going to pull the trigger on a quarterback. Who and where, I don't know. But if you believe the mock drafts and all the analysts, it's unlikely that the top 5 quarterbacks get out of the top 15 picks. So if the Saints are going to take one of them, they're going to have to get really aggressive to move up. And it would probably be Mac Jones from Alabama. And I don't know, none of us do, what they think about him as a prospect. So what they do, well, they're not rebuilding, what they do in free agency could go so many ways, because the ripple effect of the draft will have that type of impact. For example, let's say Sheldon Rankins and Malcolm Brown aren't back. Hypothetically. They decide not to invest the money there, and Rankins gets a big deal somewhere else. Okay. And Brown could be a cap casualty. Well, maybe the Saints go defensive line. I'm not sure if you saw the report, but NFL, the Draft Network's Justin Mello reported that Aleem McNeil out of NC State, big defensive lineman, a 6'2", 320, he has a meeting with the Saints. He's already met with the Packers and the Seahawks, the Jets, Jags, Colts. So he's had a bunch of meetings already. And this is a guy that's a big physical interior player, is a great athlete as well, played high school baseball, was actually a running back and a linebacker in high school, and then became a 320-pound defensive tackle in college at NC State. So maybe the Saints, if they don't retain Rankins, they go defensive line. Or maybe if they decide to cut Janoris Jenkins, which I think they will as a cap-saving move, it'll save them in north of $7 million. Maybe they use that 28th pick to take a cornerback. It's possible. If they can't re-sign Marcus Williams, it's entirely possible they're looking safety at the top of the draft. Flip it over to the other side of the ball. We just talked about that domino effect on the offensive line. You know, it's very likely this year Cesar Ruiz moves to his natural position and plays center, and McCoy moves to right guard. You know Andrus Peat is your left guard, and you know Ryan Ramczyk is your right tackle. Teron Armstead has a large cap hit and could very well be a cap casualty as well. So what if you go offensive tackle at the end of round one, cut Teron Armstead, and replace him? It would effectively be the same thing they did when they drafted Ruiz. Now, none of us knew it at the time, but the Saints weren't keeping Larry Warford. They knew that. So as soon as they got Ruiz, they cut Warford, saved his cap number, and Ruiz becomes your starter. Well, he rotated with Easton. But you feel like you've got 4 starters in place, 5. I mean, Armstead can still play, but he may be a cap casualty. It could go offensive line. Would anybody be super bummed if the Saints decided to go wide receiver? Now that you'll finally have a quarterback with a strong arm that can push the ball downfield, if you decide to get him that blow the top off the defense type receiving threat? Now, maybe Sean Payton and the Saints believe Deontay Harris can be that guy, or maybe they look at Kadarius Toney mid-late round 1. If they don't stand pat at 28, maybe they move up and get him. Would you be upset at that? I would. I'd be pumped if they went and got a guy like that. Or maybe on the other side of the ball, the position we've talked about so much, what about linebacker? You know Demario Davis is awesome. Alex Anzalone has been very hot and cold in his career. You love Quan Alexander, but he's not going to be back at $13 million. So you're not picking up the final year of that contract. Can you re-sign Quan at an agreeable number? That'd be awesome if you could. How does he come back from the Achilles injury? What does it cost? That's a big question. If that's not agreeable, then very likely you part ways with Quan Alexander, you draft a linebacker. That's my point when I say this is the most intriguing draft. Because the Saints have been knocking on the doorstep of a championship. And you knew Breeze was in place, and as a result, everything else was stable, but you could always look and say, man, the one spot where they're deficient is, and they need a rush end opposite Cam Jordan, Davenport. They don't have that number one lockdown corner, Marshawn Lattimore. You could go through the list and see that as they made those moves. You need an interior lineman because of Warford and Unger out, McCoy, Ruiz. Like, you can see what they've done in the draft. But this is one of those years where your core's in place, but what you do in free agency, what cap casualties come as a result of this reduced cap number and your cap situation is going to determine in large part what you do in that draft. And it could go a lot of different ways, maybe even in the trenches on either side of the ball, which wouldn't be a great surprise because 5 of the last 6 first-round picks the Saints have had, they've used on linemen, offensive or defensive. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.